The laughter reached her before the words did. Sonara stood in the center of the Hartwell ballroom, surrounded by silk and candlelight and the glittering cruelty of London's finest, while her husband's voice cut through the music like a blade through water. 3 years, Aldrich said, loud enough for the nearest dozen guests to hear, his wine glass tilting carelessly in his hand. 3 years of marriage, and what do I have to show for it? A wife who cannot produce an heir. A wife who cannot manage a household without supervision. A wife who stands there like a porcelain doll with nothing behind her eyes. The string quartet played on, but conversations nearby had stopped. Fans fluttered. Heads turned. Sonara felt the weight of 100 gazes pressing against her skin like physical force. She said nothing. Perhaps I should have listened to my mother, Aldrich continued, warming to his audience. His handsome face twisted into something uglier, something only she usually saw behind closed doors. She warned me about marrying beneath my station, but I thought surely a pretty face would compensate for an empty mind. I was wrong. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed, a nervous tittering sound that echoed off the painted ceiling. Still, Sonara said nothing. Her hands remained clasped at her waist, her spine straight, and her expression carefully blank. She had learned, over 3 years of marriage to Lord Aldrich Vane, Viscount of Thornbury, that words were weapons he collected and sharpened and used against her later, in private, when there were no witnesses. Every defense she offered became evidence of her hysteria. Every tear became proof of her weakness. Every flash of anger became justification for his correction. So she had stopped giving him ammunition. "Look at her," Aldrich sneered, gesturing with his glass. A drop of wine splashed onto the marble floor. "Silent as a grave. Is it any wonder I seek companionship elsewhere? A man cannot be expected to—" Lord Vane. The voice came from somewhere to Sonara's left, low and precise, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had never needed to raise their voice to be heard. The ballroom seemed to still around it. She turned her head slightly, just enough to see him. He was tall, dark-haired, with the kind of sharp-angled features that painters loved and mothers warned their daughters about. His evening clothes were immaculate, his posture effortlessly commanding, and his blue-gray eyes were fixed on Aldrich with an expression that made Sonara's pulse scatter. Cold, controlled, dangerous. "I believe," the stranger continued, moving through the crowd with the unhurried grace of a predator who knew his prey couldn't escape. "You've made your point with admirable clarity. Perhaps you might consider making it elsewhere." Aldrich's face flushed. "I beg your pardon. This is a private conversation between a man and his wife." "There is nothing private about it. Half the ballroom has been listening." The stranger stopped directly between Sonara and her husband, effectively blocking Aldrich's path to her. "And I suspect the other half will hear about it before the night is over. If that was your intention, congratulations. If not, I suggest you stop speaking immediately." The murmurs around them shifted, took on a new tone. Sonara heard a whispered word ripple through the crowd, passed from mouth to ear like a flame catching on kindling. Westmere. The Duke of Westmere. Her heart lurched. She was standing in the shadow of a duke while her husband sputtered and searched for words that would not come. Aldrich had been outranked, outmaneuvered, and publicly silenced by someone who held more power in his smallest gesture than Aldrich held in his entire title. "Your Grace," Aldrich finally managed, the honorific forced through gritted teeth. "I had no idea you were acquainted with my wife." "I wasn't," the Duke's voice remained level. "Until now." He turned then, offering Sonara his arm with a formality that somehow felt like defiance. His eyes met hers, and she saw something there she hadn't expected. Not pity, Not curiosity. Something fiercer, more focused. Recognition. "Lady Vane," he said, "would you care for some air? I find the atmosphere in here has become rather stifling." Sonara looked at his outstretched arm, looked at her husband's reddening face, looked at the sea of watching eyes that would carry this moment through every drawing room in London by morning. She took his arm. It was the first choice she had made in 3 years that belonged entirely to her. The terrace was cool and quiet, lit by scattered lanterns that turned the garden beyond into a landscape of silver and shadow. Sonara released the Duke's arm as soon as they were clear of the doors, wrapping her own arms around herself against a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. "I apologize," she said, the first words she had spoken all evening. Her voice came out rough, unpracticed. "I've created a scene. You shouldn't have involved yourself. You created nothing." His tone was blunt, almost irritated. "Your husband created a spectacle. I merely ended it. By making yourself part of the scandal. I'm a duke. Everything I do becomes a scandal eventually. I've learned to be selective about which ones are worth the trouble." She turned to look at him properly for the first time. Up close, he was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 30, though his eyes held the weight of someone who had seen more than his years should allow. There was a tension in him, carefully contained, like a storm held behind glass. "Why did you intervene?" she asked. "You don't know me. You have no obligation to—" "I know what I saw." His jaw tightened. A man publicly degrading his wife while she stood there and took it. That required no acquaintance to find repellent. "I wasn't just taking it." The words escaped before she could stop them, sharp with a frustration she rarely allowed herself to feel. "I was surviving it. There's a difference." A flicker crossed his features, the coldness thawing into something more complicated. "Yes," he said. "I imagine there is." They stood in silence for a moment, the distant music drifting through the night air. Sonara's thoughts scattered like leaves in a windstorm. What had she done? What would happen now? Aldrich would be furious. Aldrich would make her pay for this, for the humiliation of having another man come to her defense, for the whispers that would follow them both for weeks. "You're shaking," the Duke observed. "I'm fine." "You're not." He said it without judgment, simply stating a fact. "Where are you staying tonight? Your husband's townhouse?" The question made her stomach clench. "Yes. Where else would I stay?" "You cannot return there. Not tonight. Not after this. I have nowhere else to go." The admission tasted like ash. "My parents are dead. My brother immigrated to Canada 3 years ago. My husband's family are his allies, not mine. I have no one." The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkened garden. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, taken on a decisiveness that suggested he had made a calculation and found his answer. "My sister is in residence at Ashford House," he said. "Lady Venetia Ashford. You'll stay with us tonight, under her chaperonage. It will be proper enough to survive scrutiny, and your husband won't be able to reach you there." "Your Grace, I couldn't possibly." "You can. You will." He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her protests die in her throat. "I don't know what your husband does to you behind closed doors, Lady Vane, but I know the look of someone who has been surviving for too long. I'm offering you a night of peace. Take it." The kindness beneath his brusque words undid something in her chest. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this stranger who had somehow seen through every wall she had built. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for someone you don't know?" His jaw tightened again, and for a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because someone should have done it years ago. Before she could respond, the terrace doors burst open. So Aldrich strode through them, his face mottled with rage, his movements jerky with suppressed violence. "Sonara!" Her name came out like a curse. "We're leaving. Now." The Duke stepped smoothly between them, his body a barrier that Aldrich couldn't breach without physically forcing past a peer of the realm. "I'm afraid Lady Vane has accepted my invitation to take some air. She'll return when she's ready." "She is my wife." Aldrich's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You have no right to interfere in my household." "I'm not interfering in your household. I'm standing on a terrace at a ball, having a conversation with a lady who wished to escape the heat of the ballroom." The Duke's tone remained perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. "If you find that objectionable, perhaps you should examine why. I will have satisfaction for this." "No, you won't." The Duke's voice hardened, all pretense of pleasantry dropping away. "You will return to the ballroom, make your excuses to our hosts, and leave. You will go home to your empty townhouse and contemplate whether it was wise to make an enemy of me. And in the morning, you will send your wife's belongings to Ashford House, where she will be residing for the foreseeable future as a guest of my sister." Aldrich's face went white, then red, then white again. "You cannot." "I am the Duke of Westmere." The words were quiet, final. "I can do whatever I choose. You would do well to remember that." For one terrible moment, Sonara thought Aldrich would strike him, his hands clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with fury. But even in his rage, some calculation remained. A viscount could not assault a duke without consequences, not publicly, not with witnesses watching through the glass doors. "This isn't over," Aldrich hissed. "She is still my wife. That bond cannot be broken by your interference." "Perhaps not," the Duke replied coolly, "but it can be made considerably less convenient for you. Good evening, Lord Vane." Aldrich's gaze found Sonara over the Duke's shoulder. The promise in his eyes made a chill sink through her bones. "You will pay for this." Then he turned and strode back into the ballroom, leaving a wake of whispers behind him. Sonara's knees buckled. The Duke caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was firm but careful, as if he understood she might shatter at too much pressure. "Breathe," he said. "He's gone. For now." Her voice shook. "But he'll find a way. He always finds a way." His face gave nothing away. "Not this time." She looked up at him, this stranger who had just upended her entire existence in the space of 10 minutes, and felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "You don't know what you've done," she whispered. "You don't know what you've started." His eyes met hers, steady and sure. "Perhaps not," he said, "but I know how it's going to end." He offered her his arm again, and again she took it. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she placed her hand in his, everything changed. The carriage ride to Ashford House passed in silence. Sonara sat across from the Duke, acutely aware of the space between them, the rhythmic clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the way his presence filled the enclosed space without crowding it. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't offer false comfort or ask prying questions. He simply sat, watching the darkened streets pass, giving her room to exist without expectation. It was the most peace she had felt in 3 years. Ashford House rose from the darkness like a promise, its pale stone facade glowing warmly in the lamplight. Servants appeared instantly when the carriage stopped, moving with the quiet efficiency of a household that ran on precision. The Duke handed her down without ceremony and guided her through the entrance hall, past portraits and marble and more wealth than Sonara had seen in her entire life. "Corvin?" A woman's voice echoed from the upper landing. "Is that you? The hour is... Oh." She stopped mid-descent on the grand staircase, taking in the scene below. Lady Venetia Ashford was perhaps 5 years younger than her brother, and with the same dark hair and sharp features, but her eyes held warmth where his held winter. She was wrapped in a dressing gown, her hair loose over her shoulders, and her expression shifted rapidly from confusion to concern to calculation. "You've brought someone," she said, descending the remaining stairs. "At midnight, after leaving for the Hartwell ball alone." "Lady Vane needs a place to stay," the Duke said simply. "She'll be our guest until further notice." Venetia's gaze swept over Sonara, taking in the pallor of her face, the trembling of her hands, the way she stood, as if braced for a blow that hadn't yet landed. "I see," she said, and somehow those 2 words conveyed understanding without requiring explanation. "The Blue Guest Suite. I'll have Mrs. Hargrove prepare it immediately." "I'm sorry," Sonara managed. I didn't mean to intrude. Your brother insisted, and My brother doesn't insist on anything unless it matters." Venetia took her hands, squeezing gently. "You're welcome here, Lady Vane, for as long as you need." The kindness was worse than cruelty. Kindness made her want to weep. Sonara was installed in a suite of rooms larger than the entire cottage where she had grown up, with silk hangings and a 4-poster bed and a fire already crackling in the hearth. A maid brought tea and warm water and soft words, fussing over her with gentle efficiency. "Is there anything else you need, my lady?" "My old life back. A different choice. A way to undo the last 3 years." "No," Sonara said. "Thank you. This is more than enough." Alone at last, she sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel everything she had suppressed in the ballroom. The humiliation, the fear, the strange, terrifying hope that had sparked to life when a stranger had stepped between her and her husband. What had she done? She had left, publicly, with another man, a duke. Her husband would never forgive this defiance. Everything she had endured, every silent survival, every swallowed word, had been erased in a single moment of desperate choice. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by memories she usually kept locked away. Aldrich's voice, soft and sweet during their courtship, promising her father he would cherish her forever. Her father's relief at securing such an advantageous match, not knowing he was selling his daughter to a monster wrapped in fine clothes. The wedding night, when the mask had slipped for the first time, and she had understood, with dawning horror, exactly what her life had become. Morning light brought clarity, and clarity brought terror. A knock at the door made her jump. Venetia entered, dressed now in a morning gown of pale lavender, her expression carefully neutral in a way that immediately set Sonara on edge. "There's a letter," Venetia said, "delivered an hour ago. My brother intercepted it, but he thought you should know." "From Aldrich?" "Yes." Sonara's hands twisted in her lap. "What does it say?" Venetia hesitated. "Perhaps Corvin should—" "Please." The word came out sharper than intended. "I need to know what I'm facing." Venetia studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But not here. Come downstairs. My brother is waiting." The breakfast room was flooded with morning light, but Sonara barely noticed the elegance of her surroundings. Her attention was fixed on the Duke, who stood by the window with a letter in his hand and murder in his eyes. "Lady Vane," he said, his voice rigidly controlled. "Please sit down." She sat. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "Your husband has made several demands," the Duke continued, not looking at her. "He requires your return to Thornbury House by noon today. He has threatened to bring charges against you for abandonment if you refuse. He has suggested that your behavior last night was evidence of mental instability, and that arrangements will need to be made for your care." The word landed like a death sentence. Care, Sanara repeated numbly. He means an asylum. Yes. The Duke's jaw clenched. He does. The room tilted. Sanara gripped the arms of her chair, fighting the blackness that crept at the edges of her vision. She had heard stories. Everyone had heard stories. Wives committed to madhouses for inconveniencing their husbands, locked away forever on nothing more than a husband's word. No trial, no defense, no escape. He can do that, she whispered. He has the legal right. I'm his property. You are not property. The Duke's voice cracked like a whip. You are a human being, and I will not allow. The law doesn't care what you allow. Her own voice sounded strange, distant. I'm a married woman. I have no rights, no recourse. Everything I am, everything I own, belongs to him. If he wants to lock me away, he can. If he wants to claim I'm mad, who will contradict him? Silence fell over the breakfast room. Venetia looked stricken. The Duke looked like he was contemplating murder and finding it an increasingly attractive option. There might be another way, Venetia said slowly. A way to protect you that even Aldrich couldn't circumvent. Sanara looked up. What way? Venetia glanced at her brother. Something passed between them, a wordless communication that spoke of shared history and deeper understanding. Let me explain, Venetia said. But first, you need to understand exactly what we're proposing. A false courtship. Sanara heard the words, but her mind struggled to arrange them into meaning. She was sitting in the Duke's private study now, a glass of brandy she hadn't touched warming in her hands, while Venetia and Corvin Ashford outlined what they were carefully calling a strategic arrangement. Not false, Venetia corrected gently. Public. Visible. Scandalous enough to shift the narrative, unrespectable enough to survive scrutiny. You want me to pretend the Duke is courting me? Sanara looked between them. I'm a married woman. That's not scandal. That's social suicide. Not if it's handled correctly. The Duke spoke for the first time since they had entered the study. He stood by the fireplace, one arm resting on the mantel, his features guarded. Your husband humiliated you publicly last night. By this afternoon, every drawing room in London will be discussing it. The question is what story they'll be telling. The story of a cruel husband and a suffering wife, Venetia continued. A woman who endured in silence until a protector stepped forward to defend her honor. It's romantic, it's sympathetic, and most importantly, it shifts the power. How? Because I outrank him. The Duke's voice was flat, factual. A viscount cannot touch a woman under a duke's protection without consequence. If society believes I have a personal interest in your well-being, your husband's options become considerably more limited. Sanara's head was spinning. But why would you do this? What possible benefit could you gain from being linked to a married woman and the scandal that comes with her? Venetia and the Duke exchanged another glance. This time, it was Venetia who looked away first. My brother has his own situation to navigate, she said. Our grandmother, the Dowager Duchess Honoria, has been rather insistent about his marriage prospects. She's arranged an understanding with Lady Lucasta Pemberton and her family. I have made no such understanding, the Duke said coldly. My grandmother has arranged it entirely without my consent, and Lucasta Pemberton is a calculating social climber who views me as a title to be acquired rather than a person to be known. Corvin, I will not marry a woman who looks at me and sees only the coronet. His voice had sharpened, revealing something raw beneath the controlled surface. I watched my mother try to survive a marriage without love. I will not repeat her mistake. The confession carried more weight than he'd intended to reveal. Sanara found herself looking at him differently, seeing past the title and the authority to the man underneath. a man with wounds of his own. "So this arrangement serves us both," Venetia summarized, her tone pragmatic. "Sonara gains protection from her husband. Corvin gains a shield against grandmother's machinations. By the end of the season, Aldrich's threats will have lost their power. Our grandmother will have found a new obsession, and everyone can go their separate ways." "And my reputation?" Sonara asked quietly. "When this ends, what becomes of me?" The Duke moved then, crossing to sit in the chair across from hers. Up close, she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in the set of his shoulders. He was not as unaffected by all of this as he appeared. "When this ends," he said carefully, "you will have options you don't have now. Funds, connections, the ability to disappear if you choose, or to rebuild if you prefer. I'm not offering you a rescue, Lady Vane. I'm offering you a chance to rescue yourself." Something in his words unlocked a door she had thought permanently sealed. The idea that she could have options, that she could choose, that her life might contain possibilities beyond survival. I have conditions," she heard herself say. The Duke's eyebrow rose slightly. "Do you? If I'm going to do this, I need more than promises. I need guarantees." She set down the untouched brandy, straightening her spine. "First, I want my own funds, a separate account that I control, enough to establish myself independently when this ends. I won't trade one form of dependence for another." "Reasonable," the Duke agreed. "Done. Second, when this arrangement concludes, I want passage to wherever I choose. Italy, France, America. Somewhere Aldrich cannot follow. And I want it arranged quietly, without his knowledge." Venetia nodded slowly. "We can manage that. Third." Sonara met the Duke's eyes directly. "The moment you decide to pursue a real marriage with someone, whether Lady Lucasta or anyone else, this ends immediately. I won't be made a fool of. I won't be discarded gradually. A clean break, with enough warning for me to arrange my departure." The Duke studied her for a long moment. His gaze had shifted, taken on a quality that made her pulse quicken. "You've thought about this carefully," he observed. "I've spent 3 years watching every word I say, analyzing every possible consequence, preparing for every contingency. Careful thinking is how I've survived." She lifted her chin. "Do we have an agreement, Your Grace?" He extended his hand. "We have an agreement, Lady Vane." She took it. His grip was warm, firm, steadying in a way that had nothing to do with physical strength. For one strange moment, the world seemed to hold its breath around them. "Sonara," she said quietly, "if we're going to do this, you should call me Sonara." Something stirred in his eyes, too quick to identify. "Corvin." Venetia clapped her hands together, breaking the spell. "Wonderful. Now we just need to survive grandmother." Sonara withdrew her hand, suddenly aware of how long they had been touching. "The Dowager Duchess? She arrives this afternoon." Venetia's cheerfulness had a slightly manic edge. "She's been in Bath for the season, but she received word of last night's events through her network of informants and apparently decided her presence was required immediately." "Her network of informants? She has spies everywhere," Corvin said dryly. "Half the servants in London report to her. She knew about last night before I'd finished my breakfast." The brandy suddenly seemed more appealing. Sonara reached for the glass after all, taking a fortifying sip. "She won't like this arrangement," she said. It wasn't a question. "She'll despise it," Venetia confirmed. "She'll despise you at first. She'll say terrible things designed to make you flee. She'll threaten and manipulate and try to break you down." "Venetia," Corvin warned. "She needs to know what she's walking into." Venetia turned back to Sonara, her expression serious now. "Our grandmother is not a villain, but she is not kind. She believes she knows what's best for this family, and she will fight anything that threatens her vision. You need to be prepared for that. Sonara thought of Aldrich's cruelty, his public humiliations, his private violence. She thought of 3 years of silence and survival, and slowly losing herself one piece at a time. I've survived worse than a difficult grandmother, she said quietly, and Venetia's face softened. Yes, I suppose you have. Corvin stood, moving toward the door. I have arrangements to make before she arrives. Venetia, can you ensure Sonara has everything she needs? Appropriate clothing, a lady's maid, whatever the situation requires. Of course. Venetia was already reaching for a bell pull. We'll have her ready to face the dragon by tea time. Sonara rose as well, still clutching the brandy glass. At the doorway, Corvin paused, looking back at her. One more thing, he said. My grandmother. We'll try to find your weaknesses. She'll probe and push and search for cracks. The best defense is to give her nothing to work with. How do I do that? His mouth curved, just slightly, into something that was almost a smile. Be exactly who you were last night. Kong, the woman who said nothing while her husband tried to destroy her. The woman who stood in silence and refused to break. He left, and Sonara stood alone with Venetia and the weight of what she had agreed to. She had traded one impossible situation for another. But at least this cage had an unlocked door. Now she just had to survive the Dowager Duchess. The Blue Guest Suite became Sonara's sanctuary. She spent the hours before the Dowager's arrival in a state of suspended disbelief, wandering through rooms that contained more luxury than she had ever imagined. The walls were papered in silk, the color of a summer sky. The windows overlooked gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Manicured hedges and flowering borders, and a small ornamental lake that caught the afternoon light like scattered diamonds. Venetia had been thorough. A wardrobe appeared, filled with morning dresses and afternoon gowns and evening wear, in colors Sonara had never been able to afford. A lady's maid named Bryony was assigned to her, a quiet young woman with clever hands and kind eyes, who asked no questions about why a married viscountess had arrived at Ashford House in the middle of the night, with nothing but the gown on her back. The lavender suits you, my lady, Bryony said, fastening the buttons of a day dress that fit as though it had been made for her. Brings out the color in your cheeks. Sonara studied herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. 3 years of marriage had carved hollows beneath her eyes, drawn her skin tight over her cheekbones, and dimmed something vital in her expression. But the lavender silk did something unexpected. It made her look alive. How long have you worked for the family? She asked. 6 years, my lady. Started as a scullery maid, worked my way up. Bryony smiled. His Grace runs a fair household. Everyone here is treated decent. Treated decent. Such a simple thing, such a foreign concept. A knock at the door interrupted them. Venetia entered, her expression bright but her eyes watchful. You look lovely. How are you feeling? Terrified, Sonara admitted, though I'm trying not to show it. That's the spirit. Venetia crossed to the window, looking out at the gardens below. I should warn you about something before grandmother arrives, about Corvin. Sonara's heart quickened. What about him? He doesn't do this, any of this. Venetia turned, her face serious. He doesn't intervene in other people's affairs. He doesn't bring strange women home at midnight. He doesn't stand up against men like your husband and invite their enmity. He spent the last 5 years building walls around himself so high that even I can barely see over them. Why? Our mother. Venetia's voice softened. She died when I was 12. Corvin was 18, about to leave for Oxford. She had been ill for years, but the illness was only part of it. She was desperately unhappy. Father was not a cruel man, but he was cold, distant. She withered in this house, surrounded by wealth and beauty and nothing that actually mattered. The word struck something deep in Sonara's chest. I'm sorry. So is Corvin. He blames himself, though he'd never admit it. He was supposed to be here. He was supposed to protect her. Instead, he was preparing for university while she faded away. Venetia shook her head. He made himself into someone who would never be caught unprepared again. Someone who would never let anyone close enough to hurt him or to be hurt. And yet he intervened last night. Yes, Venetia met her eyes. That's what worries me. Before Sonara could ask what she meant, a commotion erupted somewhere below. Voices raised, doors opening and closing, the unmistakable sounds of an arrival. She's here, Venetia said, squaring her shoulders. The Dowager Duchess has landed. Sonara took a breath, smoothed her skirts, found the stillness she had cultivated over 3 years of surviving her husband's moods. Then let's not keep her waiting. The entrance hall had transformed into a battlefield. Servants scurried with luggage. A small woman in formidable black silk stood at the center of the chaos, issuing orders with the precision of a general commanding troops. She was perhaps 70, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of posture that suggested she had never slouched a day in her life. The Dowager Duchess Honoria Ashford turned as Sonara descended the stairs, and her gaze swept over her with the cold assessment of a jeweler examining a questionable gem. So, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, this is the woman who has set London on fire. Sonara reached the bottom of the stairs and curtsied deeply. Your Grace, I apologize for the circumstances of my presence here. Do you? The Dowager's eyes narrowed. I wonder. My grandson has made quite a spectacle defending your honor. Now you're installed in my family home. You're wearing my family's hospitality like a borrowed gown. What exactly am I meant to make of that? The challenge was clear. Sonara felt Venetia tense beside her, felt the weight of watching eyes from servants pretending not to listen. You may make of it whatever you wish, Your Grace, she said. I am a woman who was publicly humiliated by her husband, offered refuge by your grandson, and too desperate to refuse. If that offends you, I am sorry. But I won't apologize for accepting kindness when it was offered. The Dowager's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Interest, perhaps, or the recognition of a worthy opponent. Kindness, she repeated. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what it is, Sonara admitted, but I know what it isn't. It isn't cruelty. And after 3 years of cruelty, that distinction matters. Neither spoke for a long moment. The servants had stopped pretending not to watch. Then the Dowager made a sound that might, in another woman, have been a laugh. Well, she said, at least you're not stupid. That's so something. She swept past Sonara toward the drawing room, leaving chaos and questions in her wake. Venetia released a breath. That went better than expected. Did it? You're still standing. That's a victory in itself. Sonara wasn't sure standing counted as victory, but it was better than falling. It was a start. Tea with the Dowager was nothing like the polite social ritual Sonara had experienced in other households. It was an interrogation. Your father was a country physician, the Dowager said, stirring her tea with precise, deliberate movements. Your mother came from minor gentry. No connections of significance, no wealth to speak of. Your brother emigrated rather than face your father's debts. An unfortunate family history. An accurate one, Sonara replied, her cup untouched in her lap. Your Grace has been thorough. I am always thorough. The Dowager set down her spoon with a decisive click. I know everything worth knowing about you, Lady Vane. I know that your husband's family paid off your father's debts in exchange for your hand. I know that Lord Vane has a reputation among certain circles for volatility. I know that 3 housemaids have left his employ in the last 2 years, under circumstances that were never adequately explained. The mention of the maids made cold dread pool in Sonara's stomach. She had wondered about them, had feared for them, had been powerless to help them. "If you know all that," she said carefully, "then you understand why I accepted your grandson's offer of protection. I understand that you are desperate, and my grandson is impulsive." The dowager's gaze sharpened. "What I don't understand is what you expect to gain from this arrangement beyond immediate shelter. Survival. That's a short-term goal. What about afterward, when this charade concludes and you must return to reality?" "I don't intend to return to my husband, if that's what you're asking. I'm asking what you intend at all." The dowager leaned forward slightly. "My grandson is one of the most eligible men in England. His protection, his attention, his apparent interest in your welfare, these things have value. Value that could be leveraged by someone clever enough to see the opportunity." The accusation was clear. The dowager thought she was a fortune hunter, a manipulator, a woman using victimhood as a weapon to trap a duke. Sonara set down her teacup with deliberate calm. "Your Grace, I spent 3 years married to a man who viewed me as property to be used and discarded at will. I have no fortune, no family, no resources of my own. Everything I possessed when I married became legally his the moment the vows were spoken. I am, by every measure society uses, entirely dependent on the mercy of others." She paused, meeting the dowager's eyes directly. "Do you truly believe that a woman in my position would risk everything on a scheme to trap a duke? One word from Lord Vane, and I could be committed to an asylum. One accusation, and my reputation would be destroyed beyond repair. I am not playing a game, Your Grace. I am trying to survive long enough to find another option." The dowager was silent for a long moment. Her expression remained impenetrable, but something in the quality of her attention had shifted. "My grandson," she said finally, "believes he is rescuing you. He has a history of taking on burdens that are not his to carry. I didn't ask to be rescued. No, you simply stood there in silence while your husband tore you apart, and somehow, that was worse." The dowager's voice had lost some of its sharpness. "Corvin has never been able to tolerate injustice. Even as a child, he would fight anyone who abused their power over someone weaker. It infuriated his father, who believed that dukes should not concern themselves with the troubles of lesser people. And you? What do you believe?" "I believe that compassion is a luxury the powerful can afford more easily than the weak." The dowager rose, moving to the window with a grace that belied her age. "I also believe that my grandson has spent 5 years hiding from life because he couldn't save his mother, and that you represent something dangerous to his carefully constructed defenses." "Dangerous how?" "You're a cause, a wrong to be righted, a woman in need of protection." The dowager turned, her eyes piercing. "Corvin could lose himself in saving you. He could pour all the grief and guilt he's been carrying into fighting your battles. And when it's over, when you're saved and gone, he'll be emptier than before." The words struck with unexpected force, but Sonara had been so focused on her own survival that she hadn't considered what this arrangement might cost him. "What would you have me do?" she asked quietly. "I would have you be honest with him, and with yourself." The dowager returned to her chair, settling carefully. "If this is truly just an arrangement, a temporary alliance of convenience, then keep it that way. Don't let him confuse protection with something deeper. Don't give him hope where there is none. And if it becomes something more?" The dowager's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Then God help you both, because I certainly won't." A knock interrupted them. Corvin entered, his gaze sweeping the room and settling on Sonara with an intensity that made her pulse stutter. "Grandmother," he said, his tone neutral. "I see you've begun the interrogation without me. I prefer to conduct my assessments privately." The dowager rose, gathering her dignity around her like armor. "Lady Vane has acquitted herself adequately. She may stay." "How generous of you." "Don't be impertinent." The dowager paused at the door, looking back at Sonara one final time. "Remember what I said, child. Honesty is the only currency that holds its value in the end." She swept out, leaving Sonara and Corvin alone in the sudden silence. "Are you all right?" he asked, moving closer. "She can be formidable." "She's protective of you." Sonara managed a small smile. "I can't fault her for that. What did she say to you?" "That I should be honest about what this is and what it isn't." His eyes held something vulnerable, quickly suppressed. "Oh, and what is this?" The question settled between them, loaded with possibilities neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "I don't know yet," Sonara admitted, "but I'm beginning to think it might be more than I expected." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Then he looked away, clearing his throat. "Dinner is at 8. Venetia has arranged for the modiste to visit tomorrow. We have work to do if we're going to make this convincing." He left, and Sonara stood alone in the drawing room, wondering when survival had become something far more complicated. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of preparation. Madame Orsolia arrived from Bond Street with an army of assistants, transforming one of Ashford House's sitting rooms into a temporary atelier. Fabrics were draped across every surface, silks and satins, velvets and brocades, colors that Sonara had only ever seen in shop windows she couldn't afford to enter. "The sapphire for the Beaumont ball," Madame Orsolia declared, holding a length of midnight blue against Sonara's skin. "And the champagne silk for afternoon calls. We must establish a signature. Something memorable. Something that announces she belongs here," Venetia added, circling like a general reviewing troops. "Something that tells society she's not going anywhere." Sonara submitted to the fittings with a patience born of necessity, but her mind wandered constantly to other matters, to her husband's letter, still unanswered, to the dowager's warnings about honesty, to the Duke, who appeared at meals and maintained careful distance, yet whose eyes found hers with unsettling frequency. Corvin had become a study in contradictions. He was present, but guarded, attentive, but restrained. He ensured she had everything she needed while barely speaking to her directly. It was as though he had drawn a line between them and was determined to maintain it, even as some part of him kept crossing to check that she was still there. On the 5th day, she found him in the library. It was late afternoon, the golden hour when light slanted through tall windows and turned dust motes into floating sparks. Corvin stood before one of the towering bookcases, a volume open in his hands, so absorbed in its contents that he didn't notice her entrance. She watched him for a moment. Without the armor of his public persona, he looked younger somehow, more human. There was a furrow between his brows that spoke of old sorrows, and a softness around his mouth that his usual severity concealed. "What are you reading?" she asked. He startled, nearly dropping the book. When he saw her, warmth flickered across his face before he suppressed it. "Meditations," he said, recovering his composure. "Marcus Aurelius. My mother's copy. May I see?" He hesitated, then handed it to her. The book was well worn, its leather cover softened by years of handling. When Sonara opened it, she found the margins filled with annotations in a delicate feminine hand. "She wrote in all her books," Corvin said, his voice rougher than before. "Thoughts, questions, arguments with the authors. My father hated it, said it was defacing property. It sounds like she had a curious mind." She had a brilliant mind, and no outlet for it. He moved to the window, presenting his back to her. Women of her station weren't supposed to think too much. They were supposed to be decorative, compliant, content with their gilded cages. The bitterness in his voice cut deeper than any blade. "Is that why you helped me?" Sonara asked. "Because you saw her in me?" Perhaps. He turned, and his eyes held a rawness she hadn't seen before. "When I saw your husband speaking to you like that, when I saw you standing there in silence, enduring it, I saw every dinner where my father dismissed my mother's thoughts. Every evening where she sat with empty eyes, going through motions of a life she hadn't chosen. Every morning she woke and faced another day of slow suffocation." Sonara clutched the book against her chest, her heart aching for the boy he had been and the man he had become. "She must have loved you very much," she said softly. "She loved everyone. That was her tragedy." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She loved a husband who couldn't love her back. She loved children she couldn't protect from his coldness. She loved a life that existed only in her imagination. And in the end, the loving killed her." "I don't believe that. You didn't know her." "No." Sonara moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "But I know what it is to love in impossible circumstances. And I know that love itself isn't the enemy. The enemy is the cage, the silence, the being made to feel that your love is a burden rather than a gift." Corvin stared at her, as though she had spoken in a language he had forgotten, but still remembered. "So you're very certain," he said. "I've had 3 years to think about it." She handed the book back to him, her fingers brushing his in the transfer. "Your mother's love wasn't what killed her. It was having no one who understood how to receive it." The moment stretched, crystalline and fragile. They stood too close for propriety, the fading light casting long shadows across the library floor. Sonara could see the pulse jumping in his throat, could feel the warmth radiating from his body, and could hear the slight catch in his breathing. "Sonara," he said, her name a question and an answer all at once. "Corvin. I should—" He stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should tell you. The Beaumont Ball is in 3 days. It will be our first public appearance together. Everyone will be watching." The shift to practical matters was jarring, but Sonara understood the retreat. They were standing on the edge of something neither of them was ready to name. "I'll be ready," she said. "You'll need to be more than ready. Lady Lucasta will be there, and she's not the type to surrender gracefully. I've faced worse than a jealous socialite." "Yes." His eyes found hers again, and what she saw there made her breath catch. "But you shouldn't have to face it alone. You won't have to. Not anymore." He left the book on a nearby table and departed without another word, leaving Sonara alone among the shelves and shadows. She picked up the meditations, opened to a random page, and read a line underlined in his mother's careful hand. "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." In the margin, a single word had been written in response: "Trying." Sonara closed the book gently and held it against her heart. Something had shifted between them today, something that couldn't be unnamed. The question was whether either of them was brave enough to pursue it. The Beaumont Ball blazed with 10,000 candles. Sonara stood at the top of the grand staircase, acutely aware that every eye in the ballroom had turned toward her. The sapphire gown Madame Orsolia had created fit like armor, its deep blue silk cascading to the floor in elegant folds, tiny crystals catching the light with every breath she took. Beside her, Corvin offered his arm with the calm assurance of a man who had faced far worse than gossip. "Ready?" he murmured. "No." "Good. Honesty becomes you." His lips quirked. Now smile and pretend you're not terrified. They descended together, and the whispers began immediately. Is that her? The Vane woman? Arrived at Ashford House in the middle of the night, they say. The Duke, of all people. Who would have thought? Look at how he watches her. There's definitely something there. Sonara kept her chin high and her expression serene, channeling every ounce of composure she had developed during 3 years of surviving her husband's cruelties. The crowd parted before them like water before a ship's prow, and she felt Corvin's hand press slightly more firmly against the small of her back. Support, solidarity, a silent reminder that she was not alone. Lady Vane, their hostess, the Countess of Beaumont, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. How delightful that you could attend. And your grace, we're honored by your presence. The honor is ours, Lady Beaumont. Corvin's voice carried perfectly, pitched to be overheard. Lady Vane has been eager to resume her social engagements after her recent indisposition. The euphemism settled between them. Everyone knew what he really meant, after her husband publicly humiliated her and she fled to a duke's protection. Of course, Lady Beaumont managed. I do hope you're feeling better, Lady Vane. Much improved, thank you. Sonara met her gaze directly. The change of atmosphere has been remarkably restorative. The evening proceeded like a carefully choreographed battle. Corvin introduced her to allies, a baron who owed him political favors, a marchioness known for championing unpopular causes, and a cluster of younger society women who seemed genuinely interested in befriending her. Venetia circulated nearby, providing reinforcement whenever the conversation turned too pointed. And everywhere, always, the eyes followed. She's here, Venetia murmured, appearing at Sonara's elbow during a lull between dances. Lady Lucasta, near the refreshment table in the pink silk. Sonara located her instantly. Lady Lucasta Pemberton was beautiful in the way that expensive things were beautiful. Polished, perfect, designed to be admired. Her blonde hair was arranged in elaborate curls. Her gown was the height of fashion, and her pale blue eyes were fixed on Corvin with undisguised possessiveness. She's been watching you all evening, Venetia continued, cataloging weaknesses, not planning her approach. Let her come. Sonara surprised herself with the steadiness of her voice. I've faced worse. The orchestra struck up a waltz, and Corvin appeared before her, extending his hand with formal precision. May I have this dance, Lady Vane? Every eye in the ballroom was watching. This was the moment. The public declaration that whatever existed between them was more than idle gossip. Sonara placed her hand in his. You may, Your Grace. He led her onto the floor, and the crowd parted to give them space. For a moment, they were the only two people in the room, moving together with a synchronicity that felt less like dancing and more like breathing. You're doing beautifully, he said, his hand warm at her waist. I'm performing. There's a difference. Is there? His eyes searched hers. You seem rather comfortable in my arms for someone who's merely performing. Heat flooded her cheeks. You're impossible. So I've been told, though usually with more profanity. Despite everything, the watching eyes, the whispered judgments, the constant awareness of her husband's shadow lurking somewhere beyond these walls. Sonara laughed. It burst out of her without permission, genuine and surprised, and Corvin's expression transformed into wonder. You should do that more often, he said softly. What? Laugh. It transforms you. The waltz ended too soon. They stood together in the center of the floor, slightly breathless, neither quite ready to step apart. Around them, polite applause scattered through the crowd. Lady Vane, a new voice, high and honeyed, cut through the moment. How charming to finally meet you properly. I've heard so much. Lady Lucasta had arrived, her smile sharp as a blade. Corvin's expression cooled instantly. Lady Lucasta, Your Grace. She curtsied with practiced elegance, then turned the full force of her attention to Sonara. I must confess, I was surprised to hear of your arrangement with the Duke. It seems rather sudden, doesn't it? One moment you're married to Viscount Vane, the next you're installed in Ashford House as though you belong there. Lady Vane is a guest of my sister, Corvin said flatly. Of course. A guest? Lucasta's smile didn't waver. Though guests usually have homes to return to, don't they? It must be so difficult, Lady Vane, to find yourself caught between a husband who doesn't want you and a benefactor who… Well, she let the implication hang. One wonders what happens when the novelty wears off. Sonara felt the barb sink deep, but she refused to show it. 3 years of Aldrich had taught her how to bleed without crying. One wonders many things, Lady Lucasta, she replied smoothly. For instance, one wonders why a woman of your supposed standing feels the need to attack someone she's only just met. Could it be that she's more threatened than she wishes to appear? Lucasta's smile froze. Around them, fans fluttered with increased intensity. Threatened? Lucasta laughed, but it came out brittle. By you? How amusing. Is it? Then why are you here, interrupting a dance that didn't concern you, to deliver insults disguised as conversation? Sonara stepped closer, her voice low. I've survived worse than you, my lady. Much worse. If you think a few pointed comments will send me running, you've gravely miscalculated. For one crystalline moment, something like respect flickered in Lucasta's eyes. Then her mask reassembled, and she turned away with a dismissive flutter of her fan. Enjoy your evening, Lady Vane, while it lasts. She swept into the crowd, and Sonara realized her hands were shaking. Come with me, Corvin murmured, his hand finding her elbow. You need air. He guided her through the press of bodies, through a set of French doors, onto a moonlit terrace that overlooked the Beaumont Gardens. The night air was cool against Sonara's flushed skin, and she gripped the stone balustrade as though it were the only solid thing in a tilting world. You were magnificent, Corvin said, standing beside her, but not touching. See, I've never seen anyone handle Lucasta that effectively. I've had practice, different predator, same tactics. You shouldn't have to fight alone. I'm not alone. She turned to face him, and the moonlight caught the angles of his face, transforming him into something from a painting. You've been beside me all evening. You've been beside me since the moment you stepped between me and Aldrich. I don't know why, but you have. Don't you? His voice had dropped, taken on a roughness that made warmth spread through her chest. I have theories. I'm afraid to test them. Afraid of what you'll find. Or afraid of what you won't. Both. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the slight tremor in his careful control. I've spent 5 years not feeling anything, he said. I thought it was safer, easier. I thought if I kept everyone at arm's length, nothing could touch me. His hand rose, hovering near her face without quite making contact. Then you stood in that ballroom, saying nothing, while your husband tried to destroy you, and I felt everything, all at once, like drowning and breathing for the first time simultaneously. Corvin, tell me to stop, his voice cracked. Tell me this is just an arrangement, that I'm being foolish, that you don't feel. I feel everything, too. The words escaped before she could stop them, and his hand finally made contact, cupping her cheek with devastating tenderness. He was going to kiss her. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the way the air between them had become charged with possibility. Then a voice shattered the moment. Well, Now isn't this cozy? They sprang apart. In the doorway to the terrace, silhouetted against the light from the ballroom, stood Aldrich, and he was smiling. Husband! The word tasted like poison in Sonara's mouth. Aldrich stepped onto the terrace, his movements unhurried, his smile widening as he took in the scene before him. He was dressed impeccably, every hair in place, every button polished, the perfect picture of an aggrieved gentleman. "My dear wife," he said, his voice carrying the silky menace she knew too well. "I've been looking everywhere for you. Imagine my surprise when I heard you'd be attending tonight's festivities on the arm of the Duke of Westmere." Corvin positioned himself between them, his stance shifting into something protective and dangerous. "Lord Vane, I thought I made myself clear at the Hartwell Ball." Oh, you were very clear, Your Grace. Admirably so." Aldrich's gaze never left Sonara. "But you see, there's been a misunderstanding. My wife is unwell. She's been suffering from nervous episodes for some time now. I blame myself, really. I should have sought help for her sooner." The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that Sonara felt her lungs forget their purpose. "I'm not unwell," she said. "Of course you'd say that, darling. That's the nature of the illness." Aldrich's expression transformed into something approaching concern, a mask he wore with terrifying skill. "The doctors have been most concerned. Your flight from our home, the wild accusations, this inappropriate attachment to another man, all symptoms of a deeply troubled mind. You're lying." "Am I?" He produced a folded document from his coat pocket. "I have here a letter from Dr. Mortimer Crane, one of London's most respected alienists. He's examined the evidence of your behavior and concluded that immediate intervention may be necessary. For your own protection, of course." The terrace seemed to spin around Sonara. An alienist, a doctor who could sign away her freedom with a stroke of his pen. This was what Aldrich had been planning, not just to retrieve her, but to silence her permanently. "That letter is worthless," Corvin said, his voice hard as steel. "You cannot commit a woman based on her husband's accusations alone." "Can't I?" Aldrich tucked the letter away with deliberate care. "You'd be surprised what a concerned husband can accomplish when he has the right connections and the right motivation. What do you want, Vane?" "What I've always wanted. My wife, on return to my household where she belongs." Aldrich's eyes found Sonara's. "Come home, darling. End this ridiculous charade. I'm prepared to be lenient, given the circumstances." "Lenient." Sonara's voice shook with something between fear and fury. "You mean you'll only beat me occasionally instead of regularly? You'll only humiliate me in private instead of public? You'll only destroy what's left of me slowly instead of all at once?" The mask slipped, just for a second, revealing the monster beneath. "Careful, Sonara. You're making my case for me. Such emotional instability, such wild accusations." "They're not accusations. They're facts." She stepped forward, drawing on reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. "You are a cruel, petty, vicious man who derives pleasure from the suffering of others. Fawn, you married me because you wanted someone to control, someone to break, and when I refused to break, you hated me for it." Aldrich's smile vanished. "You've made a grave mistake, wife. Coming here tonight, flaunting your relationship with the Duke, and thinking he could protect you from the consequences of your actions. I am not your property. The law disagrees." "The law," Corvin cut in, stepping forward, "is considerably more flexible than you seem to believe, and considerably less kind to men who abuse their wives when those wives have powerful allies." The two men faced each other across the moonlit terrace, and Sonara could feel the violence humming beneath the surface of their civilized exchange. "Are you threatening me, Your Grace?" "I'm informing you. There's a difference. So there is. Aldrich adjusted his cuffs with deliberate casualness. Very well. Keep her for now. Play your games. But remember this, Westmere. She is still my wife. That bond cannot be broken by your interference or your influence. And eventually, inevitably, she will have to return to me. The law demands it. He turned and walked back into the ballroom, leaving devastation in his wake. Sonara's knees buckled. Corvin caught her, his arms wrapping around her with desperate strength. He's right, she whispered against his chest. The law is on his side. There's nothing. There's always something. His voice was fierce, certain. We'll find a way. How? He has doctors willing to sign whatever he asks. He has connections, influence, money. What do I have? You have me. She looked up at him, when what she saw in his eyes should have given her hope. Instead, it filled her with terror, because he meant it. He meant every word. He would burn his reputation, his position, his entire world to the ground if it meant protecting her from Aldrich. And she couldn't let him. Corvin, she said slowly, pulling back. This has gone too far. What do you mean? I mean, I can't let you destroy yourself for me. Your family, your position, everything you've built. Aldrich will drag it all through the mud. He'll make it seem sordid, make it seem like... I don't care what it seems like. But I do. Her voice cracked. I care that your grandmother warned me this would happen. I care that your mother's portrait hangs in that house where I've been playing at belonging. I care that you've spent 5 years protecting yourself from pain, and I'm about to bring more of it crashing down on you than you've ever experienced. Sonara, I was wrong to agree to this arrangement. The words tasted like ashes, but she forced them out. I should have found another way. I should have disappeared, gone somewhere Aldrich couldn't find me, instead of dragging you into my disaster. You didn't drag me, I chose. And I'm choosing to end it. She stepped back, putting distance between them. Before this goes any further, before either of us does something we can't undo. It's already too far. He reached for her, and she flinched away. Sonara, please. Goodbye, Corvin. She fled before he could stop her, before her resolve could crumble, and before she could let herself believe that love was worth the destruction it would cause. Behind her, she heard him call her name. She didn't look back. Sonara left Ashford House before dawn. She took nothing but the clothes on her back and a small purse of coins she'd found in her room, left there, she suspected, by Venetia, who seemed to understand that desperate people needed options. The sapphire gown was folded carefully on the bed, along with a letter she had labored over for hours. I cannot stay and watch you sacrifice everything for someone who was never meant to be part of your world. Please don't follow me. Please don't look for me. It's better this way. Sonara, she didn't believe the last part. Nothing about this was better. But it was necessary. The morning streets of London were gray and cold, populated by servants and tradespeople beginning their daily routines. Sonara walked without destination, her mind churning through possibilities that all ended in the same place. She couldn't return to Aldrich. She couldn't stay with Corvin. She had no family, no friends, no resources beyond a handful of coins that wouldn't last a week. For the first time since the Hartwell ball, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her situation. The tears came silently, streaking down her cheeks as she walked through streets that didn't know her name. She found herself, eventually, at the doorstep of a boarding house in a modest neighborhood. The woman who answered looked her over with shrewd, knowing eyes. Running from something or someone? Both. Aren't they all? The woman stepped aside. 3 shillings a week, meals included. I don't ask questions, and you don't cause trouble. Agreed? Agreed. The room was small and sparse, a narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair by a grimy window. It was nothing like the blue guest suite at Ashford House, but it was hers, at least for now. Sonara sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. The days that followed blurred together. She took in mending work, a skill her mother had taught her as a girl, and discovered that her fine stitching was valued even by those of modest means. It wasn't much, but it was something. A way to survive. But survival felt hollow now. She caught herself thinking of Corvin at odd moments, the way he'd looked at her in the library, raw with grief and hope, the way he'd held her on the terrace as if she were something precious, the way he'd stepped between her and Aldrich without hesitation, or willing to face any consequence. You have me. But she had given him back, and now she had nothing. On the 5th day, a knock came at her door. Sonara opened it expecting the landlady. Instead, she found a woman she had never seen before, middle-aged, well-dressed, with kind eyes and an envelope in her hands. Lady Vane? The woman pressed the envelope into her hands. A message from someone who cares very much about your welfare. Before Sonara could respond, the woman was gone. With trembling fingers, Sonara opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in familiar handwriting. You told me to be honest about what this is and what it isn't. This isn't an arrangement. It hasn't been for weeks. This is me, standing in the ruins of every wall I've ever built, asking you to come back. Not because I need to save you, Ziot, but because you've already saved me. You made me feel alive again. You made me want to be present instead of merely existing. You made me believe that love might be worth the risk of loss. If you don't feel the same, I'll accept your answer. I'll let you go. But I need to hear you say it to my face. I need to know that you're choosing this, not running from something you're too afraid to want. I'll be at Ashford House, waiting. Yours, in whatever way you'll allow. Corvin Sonara read the letter 3 times, then a 4th. Then she pressed it against her chest and let the tears fall freely. He hadn't given up. Despite everything she'd said, everything she'd done to push him away, he was still there. Still waiting. Still choosing her. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose him back. She thought of the Dowager's words. Honesty is the only currency that holds its value in the end. She thought of his mother's annotation in the Book of Meditations. Trying. She thought of 3 years spent in silence, accepting cruelty because she believed she had no other choice. She did have a choice now. She had always had a choice, and she was done being afraid to make it. The carriage Sonara hired cost most of her remaining coins, but she didn't care. She arrived at Ashford House as the afternoon sun slanted gold across the facade, painting the stone with warm light. The footman who opened the door looked startled to see her, disheveled, underdressed, clearly having traveled from somewhere considerably less elegant, but his training held. Lady Vane, welcome back. Is the Duke here? In the study, my lady. Shall I announce? But Sonara was already moving past him. She knew the way now. She had walked these halls enough times that they felt like home. The study door was closed. She paused before it, suddenly terrified. What if she was too late? What if he had changed his mind? What if the letter had been written in a moment of weakness that he now regretted? Then she remembered standing in silence while her husband tore her apart. And she knew that silence was no longer something she could accept. She opened the door. Corvin stood at the window, his back to her, his posture rigid with the kind of tension that spoke of sleepless nights and endless waiting. He turned at the sound of the door, and when he saw her, something in his face shattered. Sonara, you asked me to say it to your face. Her voice shook, but she pressed on. So I'm here. I'm saying it. Saying what? She crossed the room, stopping just short of reaching distance. That I was afraid. That I convinced myself leaving was noble. when really it was just cowardice. That I've spent so long believing I didn't deserve happiness that I almost destroyed the first real chance I've had at it. Sonara, let me finish. She drew a shaky breath. I don't know how this ends. I don't know what happens with Aldrich, or the law, or society. I don't know if we can actually build something real from this mess we've created. But I know that walking away from you felt like dying, and I'd rather face whatever comes next with you than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, his hands cupping her face with desperate tenderness. I've been going mad, he said hoarsely. 5 days of not knowing where you were, if you were safe, if you were... I'm here now. You're here. He pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in. Promise me you won't run again. Promise me that when things get difficult, and they will get difficult, you'll fight beside me instead of trying to protect me from yourself. I promise. And I promise you something in return. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. I will never make you feel small. I will never use your vulnerabilities against you. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the trust you're placing in me. You're already worthy. She touched his face, tracing the lines of exhaustion and hope. You were worthy the moment you stepped between me and Aldrich. The moment you offered me shelter without asking for anything in return. The moment you looked at me and saw someone worth protecting instead of someone to be pitied. I love you. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward forever. I love you too, she whispered. I've been trying not to, but I do. He kissed her then, finally, properly. Not the almost kiss on the terrace, interrupted by her husband's cruelty. Not a performance for watching eyes. This was real, his mouth on hers, tender and fierce and full of promise. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, his smile was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. What happens now? She asked. I don't know, we fight. His expression sobered, but the determination in his eyes burned bright. I've had 5 days to plan while you were gone. I've consulted solicitors, called in favors, done research on your husband that would make your head spin. What kind of research? The kind that reveals he's been embezzling from his family's estate for years. The kind that shows 3 former servants willing to testify about his treatment of them. The kind that proves his letter from Dr. Crane was obtained through bribery and threats. Sonara stared at him. You did all of that in 5 days? I had excellent motivation. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Your husband has built his power on secrets and fear. It's time someone exposed both. But even with all that, I'm still his wife. The law can be changed. Opinions can be shifted. And sometimes, the right scandal at the right moment can accomplish what years of lobbying cannot. His smile turned sharp. I believe it's time we attended another ball. Another ball? The Ashworth Ball, tomorrow night. The most anticipated event of the season. He took her hands in his. Everyone will be there, including your husband. And by the time the evening is over, everyone will know exactly what kind of man he is. She felt hope flicker to life in her chest, not fragile and tentative, but something stronger, something with teeth. There's also something else, he added softly. A house in Cornwall, by the sea. It belonged to my mother. When this is over, I thought perhaps we could go there. Start fresh. Sonara's eyes filled with tears. That sounds perfect. Then let's give them something worth talking about. The Ashworth Ball was a battlefield dressed in silk and candlelight. Sonara entered on Corvin's arm, wearing a gown of deep crimson that Venetia had produced with almost magical speed. The color was bold, defiant, Not the muted pastels expected of a woman in disgrace, but the rich hue of someone who had nothing left to hide. The whispers began before they reached the bottom of the stairs. She came back, bold as brass, walking in like she owns the place. Look at the Duke's face. He's utterly besotted. Aldrich was waiting near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by a cluster of his allies. When he saw them, his expression flickered through surprise, calculation, and finally settled into cold fury. But Sonara wasn't looking at her husband. She was looking at the Dowager Duchess Honoria, who stood apart from the crowd like a general surveying the field of battle. When their eyes met, the old woman gave an almost imperceptible nod. Whatever happens next, that nod seemed to say, "You've earned your place here." Corvin guided her through the throng, exchanging pleasantries with lords and ladies, who watched their progress with undisguised curiosity. He was positioning them, Sonara realized, placing them exactly where they needed to be when the moment came. Finally, inevitably, Aldrich approached. "My dear wife." His voice carried the familiar silky menace. "I must say, I didn't expect to see you tonight. I heard you'd left town." "I came back." "So I see. And still clinging to your protector, I notice." His gaze cut to Corvin. "Does he know, I wonder? So how unstable you truly are." Enough. The word came not from Sonara, not from Corvin, but from the Dowager Duchess, who had materialized beside them with the silent authority of someone who had been commanding rooms since before Aldrich was born. "Your Grace," Aldrich managed, clearly wrong-footed. "I was merely— You were slandering a woman under my family's protection, in my presence, at a public event." The Dowager's voice could have frozen the Thames. "Do you take me for a fool, Lord Vane? I would never— You would, and you have. But tonight it ends." The Dowager raised one gloved hand, and as if by magic, the ballroom fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The music stopped. Conversations died. Every eye in the room turned toward their small tableau. "There has been a great deal of speculation about Lady Vane," the Dowager continued, her voice carrying effortlessly. "About her character, her choices, her relationship with my grandson. Tonight, I intend to end that speculation with facts." She withdrew a sheaf of papers from her reticule, papers Sonara recognized as the evidence Corvin had gathered. "Lord Vane has been systematically embezzling from his family estate for 7 years. He has bribed doctors to threaten his wife with false commitment. He has driven 3 servants from his household through abuse, all of whom have provided sworn statements." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "This is outrageous," Aldrich sputtered. "These accusations are baseless." "By multiple witnesses, solicitors, and a forensic examination of your accounts." Corvin stepped forward. "Now your creditors have been contacted. Your family has been informed. And as of this morning, proceedings have been initiated to separate your wife's safety from your control." "You can't." "I can. I have. It's done." Aldrich's face contorted with rage. For one terrible moment, Sonara thought he might strike someone. His hands shook at his sides, his carefully maintained facade crumbling under the weight of exposure. "You think you've won," he hissed at Sonara. "You're still my wife. That bond is the only claim you have left." Sonara stepped forward, her voice ringing clear. "And it is a claim I intend to challenge with every breath I have. You'll never— I endured 3 years of your cruelty and silence. 3 years of believing I had no voice, no power, no choice. But I do have a choice. I've always had a choice. I was just too afraid to make it." She looked at Corvin, at Venetia, at the Dowager. "I'm not afraid anymore." The ballroom held its breath. "You will regret this," Aldrich said quietly. "Perhaps." Sonara lifted her chin. "But I'd rather live with regret then die with silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Aldrich turned and strode from the ballroom, leaving whispers and shock in his wake. The Dowager watched him go, then turned to Sonara, with something approaching warmth in her ancient eyes. "Well," she said, "it seems you do have spine after all. I had good teachers. Don't get sentimental, girl. We have work to do. Legal proceedings, reputation management, social calls to make. I'm ready. I know you are." The Dowager patted her hand, an unprecedented gesture. "More welcome to the family." The legal proceedings took 3 months. 3 months of hearings and testimonies, of solicitors arguing in wood-paneled rooms, while Sonara sat with her hands folded. 3 months of newspaper coverage that veered between sympathetic and salacious. 3 months of watching Aldrich's power crumble piece by piece as the truth finally saw daylight. In the end, the marriage was not dissolved. Such things were nearly impossible under current law. But Aldrich was required to provide a separate maintenance, barred from contact without her consent, and publicly exposed as the monster he had always been. His family, mortified by the scandal, packed him off to their most remote estate, with strict instructions never to show his face in London again. It wasn't freedom, not entirely, but it was close enough. On the night of the Westmere Ball, held at Ashford House, hosted by the Duke himself, Sonara stood before the mirror in the blue guest suite and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. She was wearing white. Not the white of a bride, but the white of someone beginning again. Pearls at her throat, diamonds in her hair, gifts from the Dowager, who had developed an alarming tendency toward generosity now that she had accepted Sonara as permanent. A knock at the door. Venetia entered, radiant in silver silk. "He's pacing in the entrance hall," she reported. "I've never seen him so nervous. It's delightful. He has nothing to be nervous about. He's about to declare himself publicly and permanently. I think a little nervousness is warranted." Venetia took her hands. "Go on, are you ready?" "I've been ready for months." "Then let's not keep him waiting." The ballroom was transformed. Thousands of candles filled the space with golden light. The cream of society had turned out, drawn by curiosity and the promise of witnessing something unprecedented. The Dowager held court near the fireplace, accepting congratulations with imperious grace. And there, at the foot of the grand staircase, Corvin waited. He looked up as she descended, and his expression made her breath catch. Wonder and love and fierce, protective joy, all of it visible on a face that had once shown nothing but controlled neutrality. "You're stunning," he said when she reached him. "You're biased. Guilty as charged." He took her hand, raising it to his lips. "Dance with me." She let him lead her onto the floor as the orchestra began a waltz. For they had danced before at the Beaumont Ball, but this was different. There was no performance now, no audience to convince. There was only the two of them, moving together with the easy synchronicity of people who had learned each other's rhythms. "I have something for you," he said as they turned. "Another gift? Your grandmother will run out of jewelry at this rate." "Not from her. From me." He guided them toward the edge of the floor, then stopped, reaching into his coat pocket. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He produced a small velvet box. When he opened it, Sonara's heart stopped. A ring. Simple but beautiful. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, the blue so deep it seemed to contain oceans. "I know I can't marry you," he said. "The law won't allow it while Aldrich lives. But I can promise you everything else. My home, my protection, my name in every way that matters. I can promise you that as long as I breathe, you will never stand alone again." Tears blurred her vision. "Corvin, you don't have to answer now. You don't have to answer ever, if that's what you choose. But I wanted you to know that my commitment to you isn't dependent on a ceremony or a document. It's here. He pressed his hand to his chest. It's permanent. It's yours. Around them, the ballroom had gone silent. Everyone was watching. The dowager with unusual softness in her eyes, Venetia with tears streaming down her cheeks. Sonara took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Yes, she said. Yes to what? Yes to everything. Yes to you. She kissed him, right there in the middle of the ballroom. Yes to whatever comes next. Yes to the life we'll build together. Yes. His arms came around her, holding her close while the ballroom erupted in applause. 6 months later, the house in Cornwall stood on a cliff overlooking the sea. It was smaller than Ashford House, simpler, far from the gossip and glamour of London society. But to Sonara, it was everything. She stood at the window of her study, filled with books and writing materials and the comfortable clutter of a space that was truly her own, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. Corvin appeared in the doorway, a letter in his hand. News from London, he said. Venetia writes that Lady Lucasta has finally accepted a proposal from the Earl of Huntly. She seems quite pleased. I'm glad. She wasn't evil, just desperate. I understand desperation. He crossed to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. I received something else today, from a solicitor. What is it? Aldrich's family has filed for his permanent confinement. His behavior has deteriorated significantly since his exile. They're concerned he poses a danger. Sonara turned in his arms, searching his face. How do you feel about that? Relieved, vindicated, perhaps a little sad. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. He was a monster, but he was also a man who might have been different if someone had intervened earlier. You can't save everyone. I know. But I saved you. His smile was soft. Or rather, we saved each other. She leaned into him, breathing in the scent of salt air and cedar and home. I found something today, she said, while organizing the library. What kind of something? She withdrew a small, leather-bound volume from her desk, Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, the copy that had belonged to his mother. You brought it with you. Of course, it's the most valuable thing I own. He took it from her, running his fingers over the worn cover. Have you read her annotations? All of them. But there's one I keep returning to. She opened the book to a marked page. Here, in the final chapter. Corvin read aloud, Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. And in the margin, in his mother's careful hand, finally beginning to believe this might be true. She wrote that 6 months before she died, he said. I never knew she was finding peace. Maybe she was. Sonara touched the words gently. Maybe at the end, she understood that change wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. He closed the book and set it aside, cupping her face in his hands. You've changed everything for me, he said. Every wall I built, every defense I maintained. You walked through all of it as if it were nothing. Not nothing. I just refused to be intimidated. She smiled. I've had practice. He laughed. Really laughed. The sound full and free and joyous. I love you, he said. I know. I love you too. Outside, the sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Somewhere in the distance, a bell was ringing, calling fishing boats home. And in the house on the cliff, surrounded by books and firelight, and the quiet comfort of a life built on honesty and love, Sonara finally understood what it meant to be free. Not free from all constraints. The law still bound her, society still whispered, the past still cast its long shadow. But free in the ways that mattered most. Free to choose. free to speak, free to love without fear, free to begin again.